everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about how to create world-beating conversion rates through sales persuasion techniques, given the fact that competition is increasing and the complexity of the market is continuing to increase as well. I'm coming to you from PackView. PackView is an enterprise suite of tools for advertising, sales, and marketplace intelligence that works across a variety of retailers and platforms to unify your data, making it more actionable and usable for executors and strategists across the board. My name is Ann Harrell. I work on our strategic consulting team. I help with omnichannel strategies for enterprise level brands. Today, I'm joined by Tom Baker. Tom, do you want to do a quick intro of yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Tom. I'm the founder and CEO of Ford Baker. We're a full service Amazon agency helping ambitious brands to scale and capitalize on everything that Amazon has to offer globally.
Great. So today we're going to have a couple of key sections. First, we're going to set the stage. We're going to talk about recent advertising trends using PackView CPC data. Then I'm going to let Tom take it away with the meat and potatoes of today's presentation, talking about sales persuasion techniques and how that's going to help improve your conversion rate over time. Then we'll save some time at the end for a quick Q&A. All right, so I'm going to start with just a Q1 Amazon advertising recap, and this is going to be directional for the entire industry. So this is just a general overview of some trends that we've seen recently. Obviously, looking quarter over quarter, some of these trends are expected because we're looking from Q4 of 2021 to Q1 of 2022. Q4 is typically the largest the largest quarter within the year in terms of advertising spend, competition, et cetera. So what we saw quarter over quarter, spend was down across a variety of ad types. Click-through rate was actually up, and this is a key thing to remember because we're going to touch on this again in a few seconds. CPCs were down quarter over quarter, but they increased year over year. Another thing we're going to talk about in just a second. Conversion rates were down quarter over quarter and year over year. This is important to note because if click-through rates are up and conversion rates are down, there's some sort of disconnect in between those two kind of steps in the customer journey. That being said, despite the fact that we're seeing CPCs up year over year, ROAS was actually up quarter over quarter, which is definitely important to note. Typically Q4, though it's the highest competition, you also see a lot of conversion, a lot of sales, and sometimes that increases your efficiency. That did not happen this year, or that did not happen this year in comparison to what we're seeing in Q1, which is actually more efficient, meaning advertisers are getting more complex and granular in their strategy. So let's dive into some of these in a little bit more detail. First and foremost, CPCs remain relatively high, but they are stabilizing a little bit. Like I said, quarter over quarter, we did see a decline, which is expected. You normally see this little spike in Q4 almost every single year. That being said, when we look at year over year, some of the ad types that we sampled were up almost 10%. This is up from what was high or considered high in Q1 of 2021. So we're just continuing to see CPCs increase. What that says to me is competition is not slowing despite changes in the market. That being said, advertisers are able to navigate these CPC increases and these competition changes. And so we'll touch on how in just a second. As I noted earlier in our kind of introductory slide, click-through rate is increasing, which is a really good sign. Despite the fact that CPCs are increasing year over year, click-through rates are up in the double digits year over year, meaning that more people are engaging with advertising. What that says to me are advertisers are getting more complex, they're getting more granular, they're trying new things in order to get people to engage with their ads. Engaging with your ads leads to people viewing your products, which is great. So this is definitely a positive trend, and I think this is something that we'll want to see continue throughout the year. That being said, click-through rates going up, but conversion rates are not following that same trend. Quarter over quarter, and for the most part, year over year, conversion rates are decreasing. So more people are engaging with ads, more people are getting to product pages, but less people are converting when they're at that point. And so this is what we're going to be talking about today, how to solve for this problem. Definitely not necessarily just from an advertising perspective, but more so from a retail perspective, how you can make sure that your products are positioned correctly so that people are taking the plunge and ultimately purchasing the product after they click through on your ad. And last but definitely not least, ROAS is actually up just slightly. So essentially stable both year over year and quarter over quarter. These are positive trends. From an advertising perspective, it means that even though competition is increasing and even though conversion rates are down, there's still a big opportunity to optimize your strategy in order to continue to see increased return year over year and quarter over quarter. That being said, what ROAS doesn't account for is the lost opportunity size. When we're looking at the relation between click-through rate and conversion rate, you see a missed opportunity. ROAS doesn't necessarily measure that. So we want to make sure that we're not forgetting the fact that we want to improve all of these metrics just because we're seeing, ROAS consistent year over year and quarter over quarter. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Tom to talk about things you can do to ensure that conversion rate starts to trend in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just to kind of give a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. So firstly, we're going to talk about what sales persuasion actually is and our definition of that methodology. Then we're going to delve into a bit more detail around kind of why you need to go beyond the basics of producing content and what that means from a mindset point of view. Then we'll talk more about sort of extending from what Anne said there, really about why conversion rate is more important than ever before, not just from an advertising point of view, but yeah, from an overall kind of retail position as well. And then I really want to kind of touch on why conversion rate optimization is not just critical in terms of improving ROAS or obviously your conversion rates, but what that actually means to the bottom line. And then I'll go through 8 examples that you can apply to your product pages. And then finally, our key takeaways. Okay, so just what do we mean by sales persuasion? So there's no real kind of dictionary definition of this term, really, but this is the description that we would use at Ford Baker to explain this to our clients, really, about what we're trying to achieve and why it's important. So sales persuasion for us is the communication methods used to educate, inform, and ultimately inspire a shopper to purchase your product and not a competitor's product. The result is increased conversion rates. And as I said, lots more kind of business benefit that comes from really thinking about how you're going to persuade that person that's landed on your product page. So kind of just given a very general description of what sales persuasion is, I think it's really important to say what sales persuasion isn't as well, and what conversion rate optimization isn't as well. So I'm sure lots of you are familiar with this image on the right-hand side. It's from Helium 10, kind of snapshot of a listing performance. Now, absolutely nothing wrong with this and what Helium 10 are presenting here, and it's useful information. But as we say, it's necessary information, but it's not sufficient in order for you to have really high conversion rates. So if I take a kind of extreme example of what I mean by that, this is a kind of checklist exercise to see, have you got enough images? Are you using the bullet points? Are you using a description? So on and so forth. Now, having a description or having bullet points is all well and good on its own, but are they actually good bullet points? Are they actually telling a story about the product and the brand? Are they actually creating the action that you want the user to take, which is about essentially buying the product? So use tools like Helium 10's listing optimization checker for the basics, but you must go far beyond that if you're to really create high conversion rates and to compete in the market. And then just to back up some of the data that's already been presented. So the reason that conversion rates of optimization is more important than ever before is this increasing cost per click. So and I'll talk about a few other reasons why conversion rates really critical as well. But this is the kind of thing that's probably focusing everybody's mind, and it's the thing that everyone's looking at on a daily basis, and that's advertising costs. If you're seeing that it costs more to drive the same amount of people to your product pages, and by and large, these are outside of any individual advertiser's control, you have to face the reality that CPC is increasing. You then have to focus on the things that you do have control over. And one of those critical things is your conversion rates. And that's why the sales persuasion methods are so important. Okay, so let's just take a step back and think about why cost per clicks are rising globally. And there's a few key reasons for that. So firstly, there's just more sellers than ever before on Amazon. We all know that, because of the pandemic and just the general switch or migration towards e-commerce, that's going to attract more businesses to sell on Amazon. So the fact that there's more sellers just means there's more competition. Secondly, a lot of those sellers that are coming onto the marketplace, particularly in the last couple of years, a greater proportion of those are bigger brands. Maybe 5-10 years ago, obviously it was a far more of a weighting towards private label sellers, resellers, distributors, and so on. But bigger brands have taken note over the last few years that they really need to have a strong presence on Amazon and perhaps more direct engagement and management of their Amazon performance. What that means as bigger brands is essentially they've got bigger budgets and they've got better margins. So they're willing to spend more money on advertising and they're willing to spend more per click because they know that they've got a better margin and probably better product range, larger product range as well. So for those bigger brands, they can kind of outcompete and force their way into the market just by spending more. The third reason, and this might sound a bit kind of counterintuitive, is that Amazon have increased the amount of ad inventory in the search results. Now you might think, great, we've got sponsored products, sponsored brands, sponsored brand video, display, so on and so forth. So now in theory, that should reduce the cost per click because if there's more choice for advertisers, then that should lower the cost per clicks. But what it does is, because there's only a finite amount of space within the search results, let's say, or on a product page, those advertising slots are taking away from organic traffic. Now, if all brands and sellers are getting less organic traffic, then they're kind of forced to spend more on advertising. So it's kind of actually, in some ways, increasing the demand for advertising as well. So essentially, there's more demand for advertising space, and businesses are willing to spend more to get those key advertising slots. So that's kind of the big picture of why CPCs are rising for everyone. And then the other thing businesses are aware of and are having to deal with over, particularly over the last 18 months, 2 years, is supply chain problems. So not just in manufacturing, shipping, general inflation. So businesses are being kind of squeezed by an increase in advertising cost. So it costs more to send the same amount of traffic to your product pages, but also an increase in the actual cost of goods as well. So that pressure from both sides is really putting a squeeze on margin. And that's where conversion rate optimization comes in and sales persuasion. So that's something that we all have control over. And if we can build efficiencies through our conversion rate optimization, it will relieve some of the pressure that we're seeing from these external cost factors. Okay, so if we now look at really why sales persuasion and conversion rate optimization is an exercise in profit maximization. So as I said, it's not just about the improvement in advertising performance, but it's actually an improvement in your business performance as well. So, and conversion rate is fundamental to that. So if we just look at two basic formulas, the fundamentals of selling online. So we've got, firstly, the number of visitors or sessions on your product page times the conversion rate times by the lifetime customer spend equals the revenue. Pretty simple there. And then revenue minus the cost of selling the product is our profit. So they're kind of two fundamental things. Now let's see what happens when we look at improving the conversion rate. Okay, so if the conversion rate doubles, then we're going to get a doubling in revenue. So there's a very simple direct correlation between an improvement in conversion rate and an improvement in our revenue. So you can see that immediate relationship between the two. And if we move on from there. So with Amazon, what we know is that when we improve our conversion rate, we're improving our sales velocity And if anyone's familiar with the idea of the Amazon flywheel, the more that you sell, the more benefit Amazon's going to give you, and it's kind of rewarding you with greater exposure and more traffic. So the consequence of that then is more visitors to your product pages. So now we've got more people visiting our product pages, we've lifted our conversion rates, which then has an even greater impact on our revenue. And then when that in this kind of theoretical example, when we've quadrupled that revenue, but in the same time our costs have not risen at the same proportion because of the efficiencies we made through the conversion rate, then we get a much greater profit at the end of it. So that doubling of conversion rate in this example has a cascading effect all the way through our business, which ultimately leads to greater profit. And that's essentially what we're all here to achieve with Amazon. Okay, so we're going to go through our principles of sales persuasion. So these are the kind of 8 fundamentals of sales persuasion. There are lots of other concepts that you can apply to your product pages, but these are ideas and methods, principles really, that you'll be able to apply for different brands, different products in any situation. And I've picked out ones which I feel like some people will know, some people might not know, but they're hopefully ones that everyone will be able to kind of learn from and be able to apply the as I say, the principles to your product pages. Okay, so firstly and foremost, really, the most important thing with any kind of optimization work is to know your audience. Now, if we know our audience, then we'll have a much better idea of what we're going to say, why we're saying it, how we're saying it, and how we're going to position our brand and product. Now, with Amazon, we're very fortunate in the sense that we can go and look at our customer reviews. People are very honest, very candid, will give quite detailed reviews, in fact, because they want to help the community to make better purchase decisions. So we should absolutely be looking at those reviews to understand what people like and dislike about our products. And that will inform a lot of the decisions that we're making. We can also do exactly the same thing with our competitors as well. So we can learn what people like and dislike about those products, and perhaps how our products might be stronger than the competition that's out there. They're kind of 2 things which I'm sure a lot of sophisticated sellers and brands will be doing on Amazon. At least I hope they are. There's also 2 things really that go beyond that, which will kind of set you apart from the competition. So and these are things that they get talked about a lot, but often businesses, and I know this from personal experience, having worked in-house, sometimes you just never get around to these things because they're nice ideas, but they can take a bit more kind of planning, but you will get lots of value from them. So firstly, speak to your customers. Actually, go and talk to the people that are buying the products. See what they like or dislike about the product. What might have stopped them from buying the product is a really good question to ask. Do they tell their friends about it? Why wouldn't they tell their friends about it? So on and so forth. So you can create lots of great questions that are going to tease out information that you're just not going to get from, say, looking at your conversion rate data in Seller Central or Vendor Central, or even by looking at the reviews. Actually, that kind of first-hand information is critical. And then just extending that idea a little bit further, you can use products like User Zoom to record people's sessions as they look at your product pages. So you could ask them to, set them a little task to navigate on Amazon, find your product page, and then talk through what they're actually seeing and what they're thinking as they look at your product page there and then. Now, the real benefit of that is that it's live feedback. So it's not really considered, they're not sitting down after the fact and trying to remember what they thought. They're giving you their kind of real instinctive voice. And obviously you can record this and collect that information. And that's again, something that very few businesses will do, but you're going to get insights that you just won't get from, as I say, data analysis or reviewing reviews. So I really recommend just going that a bit further on and actually getting people to test out your product pages. What you can also do is get people to look at your product pages as they are now. And when you've done your optimization work, ask them to look at it again and see kind of what if those changes are having the desired impact as well. Okay, and this is just an example really that I wanted to go through. So this is a client of ours. They do at-home mushroom growing kits here in the UK. And this is their A+ content. On the left-hand side is before we started working with them, and the right-hand side is what is the kind of new A+ content that we created for them. Now, when you look at that on first glance, you probably think, oh, there's actually probably not that much difference between the two in kind of layout, design, presentation, that they're relatively similar. But when we started working with this client, they were really struggling with low conversion rates, despite having a very good product, good pricing, so on and so forth. So what we did was we spoke to the brand about what they thought about that. We reviewed their reviews. We talked to some customers, and we found that there was just a few key points that were kind of getting lost in the communication. Things that people really valued about the product, or that weren't really clear, and things that weren't being addressed. So some people had doubts about, buying an organic product on Amazon, and would that be safe, and how is it packaged, and how would they start to use the kit, things like that. So we found that kind of there were people interested in the idea, but they had too many doubts, and those doubts weren't being addressed in the communication. And so we solved for those things. And now we wouldn't be able to know what those doubts were unless we did our customer research, unless we actually talked to people. Otherwise, we're just making assumptions, or we might go down the wrong track. So it's really critical. And it's a good example where that customer research enabled us to optimize the A+, as I say, without making great changes, but really knowing which things had the biggest impact. The conversion rates on these products actually went from 14% to 25% after we made these changes. So you can have real significant impact. And then here's another example. So this is a at-home self-tanning product. So this company here, Coco and Eve, they know that, having done their customer research, that one of the reservations that people will have to buying this type of product online as opposed to in a store is that, how do you know which kind of shade of tan do you actually want, and which one's kind of suitable for your skin? Because obviously you can't physically open it up, test it out, see what it actually looks like. So they know that that's kind of a pain point for their customer, having done the research. So they address that head on in their communication in a really simple style that's very clear and easy for the consumer to look at. Okay, then moving on to number 2, really. So this is more about having the right mindset for selling a product on Amazon. So it's not necessarily a specific thing that you're going to do, but it's about getting into the right mindset before you start to think about what content you're going to create and what changes you're going to make to your product pages. So we talk about this idea at Ford Baker of thinking about the product page as a product demo as opposed to a catalog. So if you think about what a catalog is, I'm going to example image here. It's a very descriptive, plain, functional presentation of a product. If people know exactly what they want and they're just trying to buy it, they open up a catalog. In the old days, they'd phone up and kind of order something. That's not necessarily really persuading anyone. It's just a way of people sort of accessing a product and being able to buy it. There's nothing really persuasive about that. Now on Amazon, because there's unlimited choice, it's easy to switch between different products. You've got to really make an impact in what you're saying. So you've got to go far, far beyond the practical functional information of a catalog and think more about this idea of a demonstration. So imagine you're in a retail store, you're in bricks and mortar, you're standing there in a department store with your products behind you, and there's shoppers walking by, How are you going to attract their attention? What's going to make them stop? What's going to make them listen? And let's say you've got 30 seconds to persuade them to buy your product there and then. What are you actually going to say that's going to persuade them to buy your product? You're not going to talk about size, material, that kind of stuff. You're going to talk about the benefit that this product's going to make to people's lives and why it's going to have and what those benefits are. So just think about that as a kind of mindset thing. As I say, before you start to actually produce any content on Amazon, because there is unlimited choice and because it's very easy for people to browse around, you've really got to grab attention. And that comes, if you think about that person standing in a department store trying to grab attention, that's the kind of, you've got to be that kind of person really, or certainly get into that mindset before you start to make any changes. Okay, so number 3, make me healthier, happier, and wealthier. So fundamentally, people are buying product to solve a problem or to get a job done. Okay, so you've got to think about how your product helps that person to do those things. And often it's essentially, how do I become healthier, happier, wealthier? There's this idea of, as I say, either getting a particular job done or making some progress with your life, or just getting to some better outcome as a result of using the product. So you really want to kind of frame your product based on this idea of problem or this particular need, and this product is designed perfectly for me to be able to solve for that particular problem and to derive the benefit from having solved that particular problem. Okay, and so if we just go on to a kind of classic example of that, this is the idea of future pacing. So the future pacing is essentially showing the positive outcome that will happen as a result of using a product. And people will actually know that everyone will be familiar with this because you'll have seen it in the beauty industry, the classic idea of a before and after shot. Obviously, it's showing maybe someone who's got problems with their skin, and then after using the product, their skin's smooth, whatever it might be. That's called future pacing. And the reason why the beauty industry uses that, because it's this idea of progress, solving a problem, of essentially a better outcome having used the product. But that's not just something that can be used within beauty, that can be used in all sorts of different areas. So it might be something that's saving you time. It may maybe allow you to spend more time with your family. It makes you feel better, makes you look better, maybe feel more confident, less stressed, all of these kind of things. So you think about what is it actually the product's solving for, and being really kind of evocative in your imagery, showing people what that better outcome is. So not just telling them that they're going to get a better outcome, but show them what that better outcome will be visually. And that's really important because it's then playing on some emotional drivers of buying product, and that's really persuasive. Okay, so number 4 then. So you'll read or hear lots of talk about sort of benefits and features, and they're both obviously really important, not to discount them in any way, but we really like to think about a kind of step beyond that, and that's talking about advantages. So what are the advantages of your product versus the other products on the market? So it obviously is important to talk about why your product is good. Let's say, it's kind of to simplify it, but why is it better than everything else that's on the market? Now, the reason you need to do that is because as I said, there's unlimited choice on Amazon. It's very easy for someone just to go back into the search box, do another search, find another product, or everyone knows there's lots of kind of competitor products in the product targeting ad space on your product pages. So there's lots of distractions there. There's lots of reasons or routes for the user to go off and look at another product. But if you're able to kind of really make a distinction between your product and the other products out there, what is it that makes it better than everything else on the market, then that's really persuasive to people, because essentially you're answering their question for them. You're making it easier for them to buy your product because you're telling them why this is the right one for them, and they're not going to find anything better anywhere else. It's obviously easy to make kind of outlandish claims about product, so don't do that. You've got to make your advantages quite concrete and tangible for people, and then they're going to be more powerful if you can actually back up those claims. So any kind of evidence or third-party authority which is supporting those claims will really have a big impact on people's decision-making process as well. So let's have a look at an example then. This is a kind of simple example that you can use in your image carousel, the image gallery. So this is for a food blender. So from the kind of customer research and the product research that we did, we could tell that with this product, there were certain key aspects of the product that were better than, let's call it the sort of the generic or average product within the category. And we knew that those things were actually important to the user as well. So for example, with this blender, something that people really get frustrated with is they're a pain to wash after you've used them. So we really kind of call out the fact that there's an automatic setting which will wash the blender without you having to clean it yourself. That's a big advantage over, as a kind of more generic product in the market. So if you can kind of use that concept, find out what it is, firstly, what people's pain points are and how your product solves for those products, and then what it is that's tangible about that particular feature that makes it better than other products in the market. So it might be that it does it quicker, it might be more powerful, there might be more options, it might be longer lasting. All of those different things are all advantages that you'll be able to call out and contrast that against other products on the market. Now, I'm not saying call out any specific competitor product and say that don't trash them, but you can talk in kind of more general sense about the advantages that you have. And it's much, much better for you to talk about the positives of your product rather than say downplaying your competitors. Talk up your product. And then we can take the same kind of concept of advantages and apply that into our bullet points as well. So this is a bit of a kind of formula, if you like, that we would use in some instances to really establish the product versus the competitors. So I've kind of highlighted 3 bits here. So I'll just kind of talk through them. So unlike many standard formula eye drops, so what that does is it creates a sense of not necessarily doubt, but intrigue, I suppose, in the consumer's mind as to this product's going to be different from everything else that is in the market or products that I might have used in the past. So it's a bit of a hook to draw people in. And then we go on to Optive Fusion doesn't just hydrate the eye. So then we're saying, okay, it does the thing that every other product does in the market, i.e. hydrates the eye. And then finally, we talk about the thing which is the advantage and the differentiation. It actively works to restore eye health. So we've established a kind of hook to say an intrigue as to why the product or possibly that this product's different from everything else that's on the market. We talk about how it does everything that other products do. And then finally, we say we go one better than that, and we talk about the difference and the advantage that this product has over the other products that people could choose on Amazon. Very simple, but again, something that could be applied in lots of different situations. Okay, so number 5, so countering objections. So people are going to land on your product page. They might like the price, they might like the look of it, but they're still going to have doubts about the product or the brand. They might never have heard of the brand, for example. So you want to be able to counter any doubts or hesitations that people have. Now, you might be thinking, well, how do I know what people's objections are? I don't speak to these Amazon customers directly when they land on that product page. It's not like them coming into a shop and asking questions. How am I going to actually counter these objections. And that's where customer research really comes into play. If you've spoken to customers and you know what persuaded them to buy the product, and conversely, if you know what made them hesitate before buying the product, then you can actually go and address those pain points and highlight the things that really do kind of tip people over to buying the product as well. But that's, as I say, why the customer research is so important. Okay, and let's look at an example then. So just going back to this at-home self-tanning product, this brand Coco and Eve. So they know from doing their customer research that there's going to be certain doubts or reservations that people have, not just about self-tanning, but the idea of doing tanning at home rather than going to a kind of professional to do it for them. And there's kind of classic things that would stop people doing it. And so they just address those head on. They don't shy away from the fact that people might have doubts. They actually address them. And having that confidence to say, don't worry about it. We've thought about these things before, and we've solved for these doubts that you might have. And kind of here, we're literally kind of ticking them off. That's really powerful to people because it reduces that doubt and it makes it easy for people to make a decision. And that's what sales persuasion is all about, is making it easier for people to make a decision. So in this instance, there's 4 kind of common doubts that people would have about at-home self-tanning. So the kind of smell that the tanning has, whether it's how quickly it dries. Some of them can be quite sticky, and then classically, a lot of tanning products can leave streaks on the skin as well. So there are well-known doubts that people will have, and this brand is kind of tackling them head on, saying, don't worry about it. We've thought about this. The product is designed to ensure that you don't have any of these issues with the product. Here's another example. So, with Coco and Eve, the hesitation, the doubt that people would have was related to the product itself. And in this example, it's not the product that people have a doubt about directly, it's actually about the price point. So this product is at a higher price point than sort of most products within the category. And there can be a sort of natural sort of instinct, if conversion rates are low, to go, oh, we need to reduce price, we need to discount, we need to do promotions. And in some cases, yes, that might be necessary, but actually what you should do before resorting to price and reductions is to think about this idea of what's the value exchange, what's the justification for the current price that you have right now. And that's what this brand does. So they don't shy away from the fact that the product is more expensive than other products on the market, and they don't give in to the idea of lowering their price. They talk about the justification for that extra price, and they do that in a kind of really persuasive way. So firstly, they say it's one product with 4 uses. Okay, so I can buy one product rather than and it's going to give, I'm going to have lots of uses for this. They show that it can be used from day 1 with your baby all the way up to 36 months. So kind of 3 years of usage on the product. They also make the point that it's actually a space saving device as well. So you don't have to go and buy 4 different products. This product's going to adapt as your baby grows, and you can use it in different scenarios at home. So putting those 3 things together, there's a really strong justification for the price point that they're selling this product at. And for the customer, if you think about what a reasonable or a rational average customer might think, they'll probably think, okay, that's a fair argument that you're making. I get it. I understand now why the product is at a higher price point. You're telling me that it's the only product I'm going to need for the next 3 years. I'll probably save money that way. I don't need to worry about thinking about researching more product and buying different products and the space, that's going to take up in my property. So there's lots of actual benefits that are called out in a really small space, but are really impactful. And they sort of address that challenge of being at the higher price point. So think about what the value exchange is. What are people actually going to get for their money? And is that justified? Okay, number 6, shoppers scan, so you must be visual. So you may have seen if you're on Seller Central that with all of the sort of app traffic coming into Seller Central, that your conversion rates are, well, they might have dropped because there's far more actual traffic data in there. But the point is, what that really shows is that the vast majority of the people using Amazon are on a mobile device. And you probably know from your own experience, but sometimes don't perhaps think about that when you're designing product pages, is that people don't go through a product page. It's the same actually on desktop. They don't go through a product page in a nice, clean, sort of linear fashion. They don't read the title, then read the bullet points, and look at the images, description, A+, then look at the reviews. No one really goes down in that fashion. People will hop about all over the place. Kind of common thing for people to do is to, once they get to the product page, is to click on the reviews, jump down to the bottom, filter by the lowest reviews, 1 out of 5, and then look at the 5 out of 5s, and then start to scan up and down. And particularly on a mobile device, people are just scrolling about here and there. So that kind of journey through the product page actually is quite noisy, I suppose, in one way. So you got to have a really kind of visual approach to your messaging, so that you're actually able to grab people's attention as they are scrolling about. And you've got to do that with the most impactful messages that you've got. And also the presentation of the content has to be in a much more visual way than perhaps product pages would have been created 2 or 3, 4 years ago. Think about this from a visual point of view, because as we know, most of the users are on a mobile device. They're not going to pour through really detailed descriptions and bullet points. You need to get that information to them in a visual way, really simple, that's really eye-catching as they scroll up and down on their mobile device. So it's designed for mobile. And so here's, I'm just going to go through a couple of examples. These are 2 A+ modules, probably some of the original A+ modules that were available to everybody. Now, if you think about these are screenshots from desktop, but if you think about them squashed down to a mobile device, it's just impossible for people to kind of understand what's going on here. It's a lot of kind of cognitive effort to actually look at that, decide what's going on, where am I going to pay attention? So you want to reduce that cognitive effort by reducing the amount of content that's there, but being more impactful with that content. And so you can turn from that very text-heavy approach to a much more visual and simple approach. So, the rule that we sort of generally apply with the image carousel is 1 message per image, and just stick to that one message per image, and then people can just get what they need, that kind of key information, as they scan through. And then looking at some sort of much more up-to-date A+ content. So you can see with these examples, this is from Gillette and from Tide. They're not overloading the customer with lots of information. They could say, I'm sure they could say lots of different things about their brand or the products, but they're not overloading people. It's very visual. All of these modules you can see are very image heavy. That's because most people are on a mobile device. They don't want to be, no one reads through lots and lots of text. But what they're doing that's really impressive here is just calling out the key information and having the confidence just to do that. Okay, and then really following on from that, because we know that most people are on mobile devices, they might be time poor, they might be going between meetings, they might be in a meeting trying to, concentrate on more than one thing at a time. Your messaging has to kind of take this sort of less is more approach. So to persuade someone, and it goes into that idea of confidence as well, actually having confidence about your product. Often that means, saying a few key things rather than trying to overload the customer with too many messages. So this is a really critical aspect of when you're designing your product page is thinking about what's the most important things that you have to say to persuade someone to buy the product there and then, and having that kind of hierarchy of information in the product page. You've got to decide, there may be lots and lots of things you could say about your product, but there's probably only a few things that are critical to the purchase decision. And you really, really want to focus on those ideas more, far, far more than everything else. They will have a disproportionate weighting on the purchase decision. So really think about what's going to have the greatest impact. And again, customer research will tell you a lot of this information. You don't need to guess. Okay, and then just to use an example, really. So Apple, the iPhone 13. Now, there's 1,000,001 things that Apple could say about the iPhone 13 or about the brand themselves, but they really just focus on 3 key ideas in their product pages. There are other bits of information on the product page, but the consistent emphasis is on these 3 ideas. And my assumption is that they focus on these 3 ideas because they know that these 3 concepts have the biggest influence on the purchase decision. So what do Apple focus on? They focus on the design. They know that the Apple customer buys into the aesthetic, the idea of what it means to have an Apple device, the importance of design to the consumer and to Apple themselves. They also know that the consumer really, really values having a great camera. So they talk about the upgrades in the camera and really kind of promote the kind of benefits and the new advances in their camera technology. They also know that the battery life and the actual power of the phone as well are critical to that purchase decision. So again, they talk about that. Now, that's not a glossy marketing message. They're very, very functional features of the product, the battery life and the processing power. They're not necessarily the kind of archetypal things that Apple people think about with Apple, but they know that the consumer really, really values having a good battery life and the, powerful processing power. So they talk about those things, they highlight them because they know that that's going to be persuasive and that's the information that people need to be able to make their purchase decision. So really think about, as I say, that kind of hierarchy of information about your product. There are going to be a few core aspects of the product that will have a much greater impact on the purchase decision, and you're going to persuade people if you can really focus on those core ideas and make them persuasive to the consumer. Okay, so just talking about the iPhone there, we talked about the battery life as an example. Now, the battery life of a product isn't necessarily a benefit in and of itself. It's a feature of the product that the battery lasts for X number of hours. And the classic idea, or one of the kind of classic adages of conversion rate optimization or any kind of sales technique is to talk about benefits over features. And in general, that is actually, that's true. The general rule of talking about benefits over features is absolutely true. However, there are going to be instances where the features of a product are critical to the purchase decision. And if people don't know about those features, then it's much harder for them to make a decision and they won't buy your product. So I'm just going to talk about one example from my own personal experience. Okay, so I was looking for a presentation clicker. I was doing a presentation at an expo. The event organizers told me, your presentation has to be compatible with Windows devices and it must be on PowerPoint. So in order for me to be able to present my presentation at the expo, I needed a presentation clicker. I needed to know, I must know whether the presentation clicker would then work with Windows and PowerPoint. Now, they're not necessarily advantages of that product, they're not necessarily benefits of that product. It's just a feature, the fact that the presentation clicker is compatible with Windows. Now, the brand that I bought from, this is an image from their product page. It doesn't look, it's not the best design thing in the whole wide world, but it gives me the information really clearly. I think this was image 2 or 3. They again know that compatibility is critical to the purchase decision. So they emphasize that in the product page. And if I didn't know, if that feature of the product wasn't very visible to me early on in the product page, I would have just gone to another listing on Amazon. There's lots of different presentation clickers on the market. I just need to have the right information to be able to make the purchase decision. And often, particularly with more technical products, specification and compatibility and features are far, far more important than people give them credit for. And they often forget about talking about features because of this idea that you must always talk about benefits over your features. But the rule here is, if a feature is critical to the purchase decision, you must talk about it and you must promote that idea. Okay, just to summarize then. So our key takeaways really. So rising ad costs are making conversion rate optimization more important than ever. And it's the thing that we've got control over as brands. Conversion rate optimization, as we've shown, is an exercise in profit maximization. Improving your conversion rate will trickle all the way down into your profit. You have to go beyond the basics of creating content to rise above the competition and to get really good high conversion rates. So it's not a checklist exercise. This is a skill in its own right. And then let's just quickly go through the sales persuasion techniques then. So when we talk about it being a skill, if you can apply these methods into your product pages, then you are going to see better conversion rates. So firstly, do your customer research, know what makes your audience tick. Think about your product page as a demo and not as a catalog. Solve for a problem and get the job done for your customer. Think about the why buy and emphasize the advantages of your product over other products in the market. Know what people's doubts and hesitations will be, and then address those hesitations head on, counter any objections people would have to buying the product. Remember that people will scan the product page, so you must be really visual and catch their eye as they scan and scroll through the page. Less is more. Think about the things that have the greatest impact on the purchase decision. What aspects of your product are the most impactful and the most persuasive, and talk about those the most. And then finally, when features are critical to the purchase decision, you must promote them. Do not forget features in those circumstances.
All right, so we already have a few questions in the chat, so I'll just read some of them now. First and foremost, is there a significant reason for not including a comparison chart in your example A+ content?
I think so. I talked about, there's an example of a comparison chart in one of the slides. Now, we find that because most visitors to a product page are on a mobile device, that comparison chart, the functionality of the comparison chart is not very good for mobile users. The idea of comparing products and showing your product range in principle is a good thing, and it's something that we used to do a lot of. But as we've seen more and more users, obviously, mobile devices dominating, we just find that it doesn't look good. It's hard for people to understand what's going on if you're scrolling on a device. So we've kind of steered away from that sort of quite text heavy way of showing product range to a more visual way of doing it.
Great. The next question is it a good idea to promote subscription services such as the Amazon Subscribe and Save program in the images?
I think if people, so we didn't, quite intentionally didn't talk about like price and promotion and these selling features as part of the presentation. So these are kind of principles that you can apply in different circumstances. I think I probably would steer clear of something as direct as saying you can subscribe and save in your image gallery or in the A+, because Amazon do make it quite clear in the buy box that you can subscribe and save. I think what I talk about is, rather than talking directly about the idea of subscribe and save, I think I'd talk about the long-term value that people will get out of buying the product on a consistent basis. So talk about the actual benefit, like why should people subscribe and save, as opposed to the fact they can subscribe and save. So what's the benefit of repeated use of the product?
Right. And I would add here that instead of calling it out like on your product page, you can use advertising tactics to call subscribe and save out, especially if there's a discount associated, which typically there is. If you are running display advertising with Amazon, that can be a great tool to call those features out. And then you can use your PDP to call out the features of the product as opposed to the features of the deal. All right, we're getting lots of questions. So one that came through on the chat earlier, let me scroll back here. How can we get feedback from customers when Amazon has restrictions on contacting customers?
Yes, so that is a challenge. Absolutely is a challenge. I think. I mean, firstly, what I would say is don't try to hack or game the system. Or, find any way of trying to get to that customer data. I think it's a much bigger topic around customer data and sort of that relationship with customers. I think obviously it leads to another point which gets talked about a lot, is kind of having some element of relationship and engagement with your customer outside of Amazon. And now I know that's really easy for me to say, but it is critical, not just from a purely from what we're talking about today in terms of doing customer research to optimize your content, but just in general, having that engagement with the customer. So, building an email list, social media following, that kind of thing, I think is critical. Brands are naturally going to have that as, individual sellers, that's probably more difficult, but there is so much value to having some element of engagement with the customer that I would really try to focus on kind of trying to build that. If you do want to get people to just, we talked about getting people to actually talk through their experience of looking at your product page, then there are products out there where they will find people. So they won't be your customer, but you could say, I want to speak to women of a certain age and certain demographic. So basically your target audience, they will find those people. So they might not necessarily have bought your product before, but you can then filter that, and then you can survey those people.
Yeah, I'd also add that Amazon is restrictive about directly contacting customers, but they do have certain features that enable you to get feedback, and they're rolling out more. An example is their recent rollout of the brand lift study, where you can input specific questions to ask people who have viewed your ads or products so that you can get insight into how they're responding to your advertising or your product pages. You can also look at search trends and see what people are searching for. If there's a trend that pops up, a specific keyword that people are searching for in relation to your product is probably something you should include in your PDP somewhere. And we're just about at time. We're getting so many questions, so I'll try to get to one more. Let's go with, do you think we should have a limit of images when enhancing a product listing?
So, I mean, the first thing is I wouldn't go with a sort of prescribed, you must have 9 images and you must use, what is it 7 mod? I mean, it depends whether you're vendor or seller, but like, don't go with the maximum just because there is the ability to have that many. I'd go with as many as you need to tell a compelling story about your product. And talking about the idea of thinking about your product page as a demo, not a catalog. So really use the imagery to educate and inform the customer, not just, oh, here's 4 different angles of my product, or here's the label, whatever. Like give people some extra information that's going to persuade them. But as I say, I wouldn't use the space just because it's there. Like, and in some ways, obviously, less can be more. You got to find that balance, because you don't want to overload people.
Right. Quality over quantity in this scenario. Yeah. And if you think back to what you were saying about people not viewing the entire page, if you have too many images before people get to the important ones, then they're not going to get to that point.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we are at time. I appreciate everyone reaching out with all your questions. If you have additional questions or if your question didn't get answered, feel free to reach out to us directly offline and we'll be sure to answer anything we can. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.